Terry Wager. This is my vlog for March 12th, 2015. I'm recording this vlog for the purpose of showing and establishing that when I make a comment on a local news website, that my comments end up being deleted after I make comments. I've explained on previous vlogs that I'm a victim of a murder conspiracy. My wife was having an affair with somebody in law enforcement when she got a job as a prep cook at the Multnomah County Jail kitchen. And these people, my wife basically became a civilian sting operative for law enforcement. And as a result, me and my side of the family became targeted by a sting operation. It was very personal on their part that they wanted to set me up for crimes. They weren't just targeting me, they were targeting my parents just as much as they were targeting me. And my parents and I, we all lived separately, and I became surrounded by sting operatives. My father, that lived, Don Wager, that lived on the other side of town, he was surrounded by sting operatives. And my mother, who lived in the state of Utah, was surrounded by sting operatives. So we were all, everybody on my side of the family became a target of a sting operation as a result of my wife becoming a sting operative. And she became a sting operative by getting a job at the Multnomah County Jail kitchen, and she started having sexual relations with people in law enforcement. So it was very personal on their part, and they decided they were going to set me up as a pedophile. And the county sheriffs took over the surrounding departments surrounding mine right after the day they made the decision to frame me is the day the county sheriff told my wife to quit her job, to hide her connections with the county sheriffs. And that happens to be the same day the county sheriffs filled out paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments surrounding mine. And it is also the same day the county sheriffs made arrangements for sting operatives that were in Utah to target my mother. And they brought in a double. So that was the beginning stages of their sting operation. That is the very beginnings of their sting operation. And the reason I know this is because that is the day I uncovered the whole damn plan. And the reason I uncovered it was because of the fact that my wife and everybody on her side of the family were celebrating the county sheriff's decision to frame my ass. And my wife's relatives that evening showed up on my property, and they're not hiding the fact, they're celebrating something. And I outright asked them, what are you all celebrating? What's going on? Because something was obviously going on. And they weren't really hiding the fact from me. They're celebrating something. Well, because my wife and her side of the family had the county sheriffs and the Portland Police Department's blessings to frame me, they had no fear of prosecution whatsoever, and were just outright celebrating the fact that I'm going to be fucked over, and they were having fun hinting to my face as to what was going on. They weren't openly admitting to what was going on, they were hinting at it. They were giving a multitude of hints. And ironically, they weren't keeping track of the hints that they were giving me. Like, for instance, my wife's sister would give me a hint when my wife went into the apartment to get a pack of cigarettes or some damn thing. And then my wife would hint at me when her sister wasn't within hearing range. So they were in a constant state of celebrating, and they were in a constant state of having fun hinting. So they were kind of toying with me at this point, and they're not really trying to hide it. They didn't really care if I know something's going on. They wanted me to know, because they're not hiding the fact that they're celebrating something. So they wanted me to know shit's going on, and they were implying and hinting that what's going on is going to fuck me over. Now, my wife's parents, my wife's mother and my wife's father, they also came over, and they were in that celebration mode as well. And it was my wife's mother that just, for some reason, I don't know why, other than just assume that she's a ditz, you know. She just outright admitted to it that the county sheriffs were going to be taking over the surrounding apartments, and I was like standing right behind her when she said it. So, and my wife's sister, Vicky Rosales, she interrupted my wife's mother when she started talking about how the county sheriffs were taking over the surrounding apartments. And by this time, I had pretty much enough hints to know what the fuck was going on. My wife's sister, Vicky Rosales, hushed her mother by interrupting her and changing the subject real quick, as a way of making it known to her to shut the fuck up. Now, keep in mind, I noticed at this very moment, I know I'm being set up, and I knew everybody on my wife's side of the family is involved and on board with it, and that this is what they're celebrating. Now, keep in mind, not only am I catching this behavior of theirs, their behaviors that evening alone basically revealed to me what this sting operation was all about, and what their more importantly, what their mindsets are in regards to it. Because even when my wife's mother, Donna, blurted out the fact that the county sheriffs were going to be taking over the surrounding apartments, and Vicky Rosales quickly changed the subject to silence her, Vicky Rosales wasn't even worried, not even the slightest bit worried if I caught that or not, or if I picked up on it or not. So they didn't care if I knew or suspected. Keep in mind, they spent the whole time, the moment they got onto my property, they were all celebrating openly, and they're not hiding this fact, and they were having fun hinting that shit's going on and that it's going to fuck me over. Well, to try to condense and make a very long story as short and simple as possible, I became a target of a sting. I became aware I'm a target of the sting pretty much the day of its inception, and within a few days, I basically made the decision, I'm going to hang in there and prove this right under their fucking noses in self-defense. Because I knew damn well that the county sheriffs use doubles, and that they use photogenic photos to frame people. I already knew that, and the reason I knew that is because I was a target of a sting way the fuck back in the 70s when I was only 6 years old. I witnessed neighbors of ours and the Multnomah County sheriffs. At the age of 6 years old, I witnessed the county sheriffs and some of our neighbors framing another neighbor as a pedo, and they were using a county sheriff officer as a double, and they were using photogenic photos. They were taking photogenic photos of the double, and it was the neighbors that were helping the county sheriff to frame this person that provided the children to pose with the double. Now, I witnessed this when I was 6 years old. At the time, I was too young to understand what the hell was going on, and none of them were trying to hide the fact from me that they were framing a neighbor, because after all, I was only 6 years old at the time. I didn't have any clue what the hell was going on at all. I was completely clueless. at the age of 6, I didn't have much in the way of wisdom, but I had a damn good memory. In other words, I never fucking forgot that. So I'm already cognizant and aware of how the county sheriff, the Multnomah County sheriffs, and their civilian buddies and their civilian relatives gang up on their targets, and how they'll stage and commit all the crimes themselves, and then they just give their target the blame. So I was already aware of this practice. When I became a target of a sting in 1999, when my wife joined into this sting operation, for me, they thought, my wife and everybody on her side of the family and the county sheriffs themselves all thought I'm completely clueless. They think, oh, Terry doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know he's being set up. Ha 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 ha. They were treating it the whole time like it was a sport. The whole fucking time. I already had prior knowledge how they fucking do sting ops in Portland, Oregon. They pretty much made everything known to me that day. Not everything, but enough to know that I'm a target of a sting and that I'm going to be framed. I didn't think of it in terms of a sting at the time because I wasn't aware of just how large of an operation it was. I uncovered the fact the day my wife quit her job at County Jail Kitchen that I'm being set up. But I did it, and I knew at that day everybody on my wife's side of the family's on board, and I knew there was at least 2 to 3 people in law enforcement that were involved. And so that was my first impression of this sting operation of theirs. I didn't necessarily think of it in terms of a sting. I thought of it in terms of a few bad apples in law enforcement are sleeping around with my wife and are palling around with my wife and her side of the family, and they all decided to fucking get rid of my ass by framing me as a pedo. And that is how I saw the whole situation. So I seen it as very personal, and I knew it was very personal, but I misjudged the size of it. I didn't realize that they had the blessings of pretty much everybody at the Multnomah County Sheriffs and everybody at the Portland Police Department, and that both of these police agencies do this to people for fucking sport. I didn't realize at the time that they had the blessings of pretty much freaking fucking everybody in law enforcement to do this shit to me. And at the time, I was unaware they had other targets that they were targeting as well. If I'd have known more about it at the time, I would have taken very different steps. But based on the information I had at the inception of this sting operation of theirs, I was under the belief that my wife and everybody in her side of the family and 2 to 3 people in law enforcement all decided they're going to set my ass up as a pedo, and they're completely unaware that I figured it out. So I made the arrogant and very cocky decision to hang in there to prove it in self-defense. I already had prior knowledge. The county sheriffs use doubles and photogenic photos, and that seems to be a common practice here in Oregon for law enforcement and for their civilian buddies and their civilian relatives and their civilian girlfriends. So I was expecting right off the bat that they're going to be bringing in a double, and I found out 2 weeks later, sure enough, they brought in a double. I pretty much had this whole sting operation completely figured out right at the inception of it all, and even understood their mindsets behind it, which is one of the reasons why I was so cocky and hanging in there to prove it, because they themselves had the arrogance in front of my face to celebrate the fact that they got permission to frame me right in front of my face on my own property. They were having fun hinting at it. until my wife's mother just blurted it out. So they were very arrogant themselves and were treating this whole situation like it was a sport. And I'll never forget this grinning and the smirking that they were doing. Everybody that was on my wife's side of the family, including my wife. It was this blatant arrogance of theirs that pissed me off to no end. I mean, I was saddened that because I knew at this point the marriage was over. I did genuinely love my wife at the time. I deemed her my best friend, and I was genuinely emotionally distraught over the fact that I've lost my wife and best friend. And we had 3 daughters, and I was very upset that this was going to harm our 3 daughters, because obviously the marriage is over. And I was taking a few days to debating with myself as to what to do. I knew I had enough information to know how to prove it, that they were setting me up. Like I said, I had prior knowledge that the county sheriffs and their civilian buddies and their civilian girlfriends and their civilian relatives do this shit to people. So I knew exactly how to prove it. And I also know when they do this shit to people, they take their time at it. They fucking take their time. They're never in a rush to frame people. They take their sweet time because they enjoy doing this shit to people. And they usually frame people not for one crime. When they do this to people, they usually frame people for a series of crimes, which is why they take their time at framing. I had the whole situation well pegged. I most definitely wasn't fearful of prosecution by any measure of the fucking... Oh man, I can't emphasize how disgusted I was. I was so disgusted. I guarantee you the last thing on my mind was worrying about being prosecuted. Hell, I would kick the judge in the nuts just to draw attention to the trial. That's how disgusted I was. Now, I took several days to debate whether I should just outright leave my wife, or if I should, and to try to warn people about it, or if I should hang in there and play their own cloak and dagger game that they're playing, because they're playing a cloak and dagger game. They're sting operatives. They got blessing from law enforcement to frame me. They're looking me in the face and lying about their motives and lying about the things that they're doing. So they're playing a cloak and dagger game, and I uncovered this fact the day my wife quit. So, I had 2 options. I could leave my wife and try to warn people about it, which that in and of itself would probably just, prevent them from trying to charge me with anything at all, because they'll know I'm already forewarned and that I'm warning other people about it. So they would simply stop trying to frame me and not bother anymore, because I'm already aware that that's what their intentions are. Or I could hang in there, pretend to be a loving husband, which in a sense I still was, because I didn't actually want to hate my wife or anybody else. But I made, I could hang in there, act like I don't know what's going on, and literally document their fucking communications right under their fucking noses and keep track of the entire process that they use to frame me with. And then just sit back and let them frame me while I pretty much document everything right under their fucking noses. Then the moment they fucking admit to their investigation, I just nail them to the wall right then and there, because I've already proved they're setting my ass up. And if they want to admit to their bullshit investigation, well, then I can prove, and they want to have a big official trial. That's when I pull out all my evidence, and ta-da, you're busted, you're caught. I'm going to sue your ass for fucking millions, you piece of shit, fascist, pedophile county sheriffs and Portland pedophile police department. You're going to womanize with my wife and then recruit her as a sting off and then frame me for your fucking crimes? Yeah, you can hear in the sound of my voice. It's personal. It's very personal. It was personal on their part. They started it. And I intend on finishing it. It's very personal. Now, I have more than enough information to know that anytime my wife is with any member of her family, they're openly discussing this. So I knew I could easily document their communications right under their noses by just acting like I don't know what the fuck is going on. And it's like, I'm not really... They basically made everything, or not everything, but enough... They gave me enough information the day my wife quit her job. The day this all started, to know that I'm going to be set up. So I have no reason to confide in them. I knew they were playing a cloak and dagger game, and I knew I could play a cloak and dagger game the same damn way and prove right under their noses they're framing me. All I had to do is keep their guard down, and with minimal effort on my part, I could actually document their communications very easily. I didn't fear prosecution. I was very cocky about hanging in there to prove it. I didn't... I basically had the whole situation pretty well pegged. I knew everybody on my wife's side of the family was involved. I knew there was at least 2 to 3 people, law enforcement, involved. And I knew it was personal on their part, and that they were treating it like it was a sport. So I understood their mindsets behind it. So I guarantee you the last thing on my fucking mind was worrying about being prosecuted. I would love right now for a Multnomah County Sheriff officer or a pedophile Portland police officer to look me in the fucking face and fake and pretend that I'm under investigation. I would love that. To pretend to be all official when I've already documented the fact that the Portland police and the county sheriff sneak around with my wife and her sister and with my wife's mother, and that they sleep around with these cops and these county sheriff officers, and that they laugh and brag about how they use a double to do this or how they use a double to do that. And I've already documented that and have their asses admitting to it. It's like, I don't give a shit, man. Technically, I've already proven they're guilty. They would never have a case. The only thing they could do is vilify me publicly and then murder me. That's it. That's all they can do. Because they can't actually give me a big formal fucking trial. They know damn well I'll kick the judge in the nuts just to draw attention to the trial. I won't let them railroad my ass. Fuck their courts and fuck their due process. Draw attention to the fact that these fucking cops and county sheriff officers were sleeping around with my wife and her side of the family, and these motherfuckers gave my wife and her side of the family permission to frame me. So I'm not going to give a shit about their due processes or their warrants or their opinions or their fucking badges. I'm not going to give a rat's fucking shit. They're guilty right off the bat of criminal conspiracy, and my wife and her side of the family recruited our daughters into the sting. 3 days later, the county sheriff took over the apartment next door to me. I watched them move in to that apartment next door to mine. I watched them carry in their police equipment and their fucking office equipment, and they were giving me the slant eye treatment as they carry their equipment into that apartment. They were very nervous that I stood out on my porch and had a couple cigarettes and just watched them move in. They were very nervous about that. Sting operatives are very slant-eyed people. They like to act like they're not looking at you, but because they won't face you when they look at you, but their eyes will be slanted in your direction. And that's what they were doing the whole time they were moving their police equipment and office equipment into that apartment. The very next day, my wife and her sister met with looked me in the face, grinning and smirking, and lied to me, saying they're going to go shopping together. And they went out and met with the county sheriffs and received further instructions from the county sheriffs. The county sheriffs just moved into the apartment next door, and the county sheriff would tell my wife to take me and the family out of town for a day. So my wife comes back from this shopping trip announcing we're all going out of town for a day. We're going to go to the beach for a day. And when we came back from this bullshit day trip, which I already knew, the only reason she's doing this was so that her buddies in law enforcement could bug the apartment. I was already under that belief that that was going to happen. And when we came back from this day-long trip, sure enough, they broke into our home. They damaged my home. They were in the attic. They put illegal video recording cameras and illegal audio recording equipment in the attic in our apartment. They were recording every room of our apartment. Our living room, our kitchen, our bedrooms, our bathroom. Their big fat donut sucking asses were in my attic, and their big fat donut sucking asses cracked my ceiling, and the crack on the ceiling went from one side of the wall to the other side. That's how big the crack, and how obvious and how big the damage was. That my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement, the damage that they did to my apartment. Now, I noticed the damage right about a minute or less before my wife did. When my wife noticed it, she got a big, huge grin on her fucking face and didn't say a word to me, grabbed her cell phone, still grinning like a Cheshire cat, and she booked it into the bathroom with her cell phone. Once she got into the bathroom, she called her sister Vicky Rosales, and she was telling her sister Vicky Rosales what her fuck buddies law enforcement did to the ceiling. She was telling Vicky Rosales that they cracked her ceiling, and that she told Vicky Rosales that I didn't notice it yet, and she was asking Vicky Rosales, her sister, to come over to see the damage. And the entire time, you have to understand that my wife, Joan Wager, was excited about this and was grinning about this, and it was amusing to her. And she wanted to share her amusement with her sister because it's funny to her. I'm sitting in the living room during this conversation, about, 20 feet away, and I don't have the TV on. I'm just sitting in the living room. There's no noise whatsoever, and I'm just sitting there in my chair listening to every fucking thing that my wife Joan Wager said to Vicky Rosales on that phone call. When my wife ended that phone call, she came back out of the bathroom, and she just pretended nothing happened, and she just is pretending to not notice the crack on the ceiling, and she's just going about her business as though the crack is not there, because she's under the impression that I didn't notice it yet. The very next morning, 9-something in the morning, my wife's sister Vicky Rosales came over pretending to say hi. It's not normal for Vicky Rosales to pay us a visit at 9 in the fucking morning at all. So it was very out of character for her to do this. But I already knew the reason why she's there, because I overheard my wife talking to Vicky Rosales over the phone while my wife was in the bathroom. She was wanting Vicky to come over to see the damage. So next morning, here's my wife's sister, Vicky Rosales, at our door at 9 in the morning, pretending to be here for the sole purpose of saying, hi, I'm just here to say hi. Now, literally, that was their, that's how she phrased it. She's acting all chipper and cheery and happy. And she walked into the middle of the living room. My wife was standing in the dining room about 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet away from my sister. My wife was staring right at my sister. And my wife was grinning like a fucking Cheshire cat. And when my wife's sister stepped into the center of the living room, she looked straight up. She looked straight up. She literally bent her head backwards while standing to look straight up at the ceiling. Looked at the crack. My wife was looking at Vicky Rosales and grinning from ear to ear. And when Vicky Rosales looked forward again, she's staring right at my wife. And here's my wife and her sister in my presence, looking at each other at this moment, and they're just grinning like Cheshire cats, like the best way I can describe it. And they started making small talk, and they were smirking when they were making the small talk. And there was a lot of communication going on with their, the looks they gave each other and stuff like that, where it's just, it's amusing to them because they already know their fuck buddies in law enforcement bugged the apartment, and they already know their fuck buddies in law enforcement put a big fucking huge crack on my ceiling. And they're amused by it, and they're doubly amused because of the fact that they think I'm not noticing. That very disgusting moment is the moment I made the decision. I'm going to hang in there and prove it, no matter the fuck what. This is fucking personal. I had 3 children. We had 3 daughters. And my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement just broke into my fucking home and bugged every fucking room of my apartment, which means my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement were illegally recording our daughters in their room, and they were recording them in the bathroom. And my wife and her fucking sister and everybody on my wife's side of the fucking family are a party to this. I guarantee you, I very much deem them to be a bunch of fucking grinning, smirking pedophiles at that point. And I knew damn well they're treating it like it's a sport. That is the moment, right there, when I made the decision I'm going to hang in there to prove it. I was no longer debating anymore as to what I should do about it. I already knew they're criminals at this point. They've broken the laws. They illegally broke into my home, and they illegally bugged it. I'm a witness that overheard my wife discussing this with her sister after we got back from that day trip. Now, keep in mind, I have enough information at this point to know anytime my wife is 20 feet or more away from me, and she's communicating with any member of her side of the family, they're talking about this. From this point forward, my wife and everybody on her side of the family, as well as the county sheriff that took over the department right next door to us, they were all coaching and directing our daughters from that point forward to put on performances for their video surveillance. When my wife left for work, when she claimed she's going to work, she told our two youngest daughters to go to a neighbor's apartment and play there. My wife made no mention of this to me. I had to find out about it from our daughters. Because every time my wife left for work, our two youngest daughters would go to a neighbor's to play, and they weren't telling me that they were doing this. And so I asked our children, why are you leaving every time your mother goes goes to work? And they didn't want to tell me, and I could see it in their faces that they were, I could tell that they didn't really fully understand what was going on because they were too young. They were just doing what their mother was telling them to do. So I didn't hold fault to our two youngest daughters at all. They were unaware that I was being framed. They were unaware that my wife and her side of the family were involved in a sting. They were just doing what their mother told them to do. So I didn't fault our two youngest daughters. I didn't even fault our oldest daughter at the time either. My wife was directing our two youngest daughters to leave the apartment and go to a neighbor's, which turns out to be a sting operative. So law enforcement was babysitting our two youngest daughters at the direction of my wife. And at the same time, my wife ordered our oldest daughter to remain with me at our apartment. Now, my wife and her sister and basically everybody on my wife's side of the family, as well as the county sheriffs that were right next door, were constantly directing our oldest daughter to perform for their video surveillance. They were directing her to undress in my presence. They were directing her to pester me for their video surveillance. They were directing her to sit down next to me if I'm watching a movie or something and sitting in my recliner. They were doing all of this stuff. And she was being coached and directed to do this. And she was doing this for the purpose of their video surveillance. Now, at the time, I didn't want to think of my oldest daughter as a criminal. The way I seen the situation was they were taking advantage of her ignorance. Keep in mind, I had prior knowledge. County sheriffs and their civilian operatives use doubles in photogenic photos. I was a witness to a sting when I was 6 years old, and I was a target of a sting because I was a witness when I was only 6 years old. So I had prior knowledge of these tactics. I didn't want to think of my daughter necessarily as, a criminal, or as she was in her teens at the time. I was under the belief they were taking advantage of her ignorance. I didn't think that, she was a full-fledged member of their sting. I thought they were just taking advantage of the fact that she's ignorant, and that they're just taking advantage of her stupidity. So in the process of documenting their communications and keeping track of the process they were using, I wasn't trying to prove that my daughter was guilty of a crime. Not until later on. I deemed her as just somebody that was being taken advantage of by people in law enforcement and by my wife and her side of the family. Now, I made the decision I'm going to hang in there and prove it. And I already know they're the criminals. They broke into my home, they illegally bugged it, and then they corrupted our oldest daughter to perform for their illegal video surveillance. That's enough to accuse them of crimes, and that's enough to accuse them of being pedophiles right there. And the mere fact that I uncovered all this the day of its inception kind of makes trial kind of pointless. I definitely had no worry or fear of a prosecution. The only thing I needed to do was keep their guard down, act like I don't know what the fuck's going on. Let them do whatever the fuck they want. Give them enough slack and they'll hang themselves. And that's essentially what I did. I just gave them enough slack to hang themselves. Because I already uncovered everything pretty much the day of its inception and was taking the time to document it. I knew anytime my wife was going to meet with any member of her family, they're talking about this. I knew with minimal effort on my part, I could record those conversations very easily. I had multiple audio recorders back then. I had shit like 100 cassettes, micro cassettes. I purchased more before they even moved in, before the county sheriff even took over the apartment next door to me. I mean, I was preparing for it before they even moved, before the county sheriff. My wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen. My wife and her whole side of the family are celebrating the county sheriff's decision to frame me in my presence, and we're hinting at it. And my wife's mother blurted it out. When I walked away from my wife and her side of the family, I get about 20 feet away from them, and I have my back turned to them. They're all openly talking about it, thinking I can't overhear. So the day of this all began is the day I'm pretty much uncovering everything, and I was already taking steps to verify it, confirm it, and to document it. The very next morning at, I don't know, 9:30 in the morning, as soon as I got up from bed, I went outside and looked over at the next door neighbor's apartment that morning, and there was a 72-hour notice on it. So that was my confirmation that everything that I overheard my wife and her side of the family talking about, that was my confirmation that what I overheard them talking about is going to happen. So I had enough information to know how to prove it. And I was basically, debating on whether I should leave and warn people or if I should hang in there to prove it. And it was about 6 days after my wife quit. That's when I made the decision I'm going to hang in there to prove it. And it was about a week later, that's when I discovered, yep, they're going to be bringing in a double. Because they had a double targeting my mother in Utah. And I found out about it about 2 weeks after my wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen. And my mother called me from Utah, and she told me that she has a new roommate. And she wanted me to know about it. And my wife lived in a trailer home that she owned, and she was living in Utah. She was disabled. She wasn't a senior citizen, but she was on SSI. She was disabled. And she owned her own home. She owned one of those trailer homes that oh gosh, I don't even know how much. She had her own place. She owned her own home, but she had to rent the space that the home stayed on. She called me 2 weeks after my wife quit and to tell me that she's got a new roommate. And I said, "Oh, you do, huh?" And she's saying, "Yeah." And she goes on to say that this person's a look-alike. She started telling me that this person is a look-alike to me. And she thought it was amusing, and she wanted me to know. And as soon as she told me that, I was immediately taken back to 1971 when I was only 6 years old and witnessed the county sheriffs and neighbors of ours framing another neighbor, and they were using a double in photogenic photos, and it was a county sheriff officer that was acting as the double. So I was immediately linking this situation to what my wife and her side of the family and what the county sheriffs that were right next door to me were involved in. I was immediately linking it. As soon as my mother told me this, my first question to my mother was, when, and I emphasize and underline the word, when did you meet him? And the reason why I asked that question is because I'm already linking it to what I'm being framed for. And keep in mind, this is 2 weeks after my wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen, and the county sheriff filled out the paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments surrounding mine. Okay? Keep that in mind, because when I asked my mother, when did you meet this person? When did you first hear of this person? And she said, "Oh, about 2 weeks ago." So at this moment, now keep in mind, I was already expecting and anticipating the fact that the county sheriffs were going to bring in a double. I'm already aware that it's common practice for the county sheriff to do this to people. So I wasn't shocked by it. For me, it was like par for the course. It's just I was already expecting this. Didn't surprise me. It surprised me that they were targeting my mother, though. That surprised me. So that was really the only surprise in that situation. I asked my mother after I asked my mother, when did you meet him, and what's the circumstances that caused you to first meet this person? And she was telling me it was about 2 weeks ago. And that's when I asked my mother, well, please describe the circumstances that got this person involved in your life. So my mother started to explain how she met this person and the circumstances that got him to move in with her. And she was explaining that there was multiple people that were pressuring her to allow this person to move in with her. She said people at the clinic that she went to, and people at the church that she went to. These were the people that were pressuring her to take in this look-alike into her home. And they were telling my mother that this person is disabled as well and has nowhere to go and has nowhere to live. And if you allow this person, if you help this person and let that person move in with you, he can help you with paying the rent and paying bills and whatnot. So under this pretense and by the pressure of multiple people that my mother already knew that are connected to the clinic that she went to and to the church that she went to, under this environment, this is what caused my mother to allow this person to move into her home with her. So I'm discovering that at this point that there's definitely more than 2 or 3 people in law enforcement that are involved. I'm now aware that there's way more people involved, and this is an official operation, and that local authorities are not really trying very hard to actually hide this fact from other people, and that local authorities in Multnomah County recruited authorities in Utah to get their civilian operatives to trick my mother into taking in a look-alike. So now I'm aware that so 2 weeks after I uncover this conspiracy to set my ass up, I'm uncovering the fact that it's a much larger operation than what I initially thought it was. I was under the belief the first 2 weeks after my wife quit that it was just 2 or 3 bad apples in law enforcement and everybody on my wife's side of the family. After I discover the double that they brought in, that's when I realized this was a much larger operation than I initially thought it was, and that they're targeting other people. Now, because I made the decision 6 days after my wife quit, because I made the decision I'm going to hang in there to prove it, I couldn't warn my mother. I had to make a decision. Either I warn my mother about this, and then I won't be able to prove a damn thing, or I can just say nothing and I can continue to document their communications and prove this conspiracy right under their fucking noses. So I couldn't warn nor tell my mother. If my mother is going to be that gullible to allow a bunch of strangers to pressure her into letting some look-alike of her son to move in with her, I can't help that. I wanted to warn her, but like I said, I knew I'm going to be framed no matter what. If they're going to take the time to bring in a double, then they have every fucking intention of framing me for something. So in self-defense, I had to hang in there to prove it. Warning people doesn't necessarily get help, and I'm already aware of that. Keep in mind, I was a target of a sting in the 70s when I was a child. I was a witness to the county sheriffs and their civilian sting operatives in the 70s framing a neighbor as a pedophile. They were using doubles of photogenic photos, and they were using the civilian operative's brats to pose with the double. And I was a witness to that in the 70s. And me and my side of the family back then became targeted by that sting operation then. So I'm not new to being a victim of a sting operation. It's like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me for letting you. So when they targeted me in 1999, when they recruited my wife and her side of the family into the sting operation, for me, it's round 2. For me. It's like they fucked me over. County sheriffs and their fucking civilian operatives fucked me over in the 70s, and here they are in 1999 trying to fuck me over again. And I was determined to hang in there to prove it. And I wanted fucking justice. I wanted them to admit to their fucking bullshit investigation. So 2 weeks after my wife quit her job at County Jail Kitchen, I'm now aware that me and my mother are a target of this sting. And that there was way more people in law enforcement involved than what I initially thought. I decided I'm going to stick with my decision to hang in there to prove it. I made that decision 6 days after my wife quit. No matter the fuck what, I'm going to hang in there and prove this. no matter what. From this point, after I discovered they brought in a double. From this point forward, the Multnomah County Sheriffs were funding my wife and her two sisters. My wife, Joan Wager, had two sisters. Their names was Vicky Rosales and Jan. Oh gosh, I can't remember her last name. Teams or Jan Teams, I think. I can't remember what her last name was. Anyway, after they brought in this double, from that point for the next 3 months after I found out about the fact that they brought in a double. For the next 3 months, the county sheriffs was paying my wife and her sisters to fill my yard with vehicles that don't belong to me and with certain types of paraphernalia, such as very large, expensive swimming pools, more than one, and with a very large trampoline. We didn't have the money for any of that shit, and it was the county sheriffs that were purchasing this shit and were just giving the shit to my wife and her sisters. And then my wife and her sisters would just show up and say, look, we bought a pool, we need you to help us assemble it. Oh look, a month later, oh look, we bought another pool, we need your help to assemble it. And then a month later, oh look, we bought a trampoline, we need your help to assemble it. And during this process, they were literally turning my yard into a playground. During this process, the double that was in Utah, that was with my mother, was pressuring my mother into selling her home so that they could buy a motor home so that they could visit me. Now, and this person that was acting as a double, his first name is Lonnie, or at least that's the name he gave to my mother, was pressuring my mother into selling her home so that they could buy a motor home. This person, going by the name of Lonnie, was pressuring my mother as well to not tell me about it because he wanted it to be a surprise. Now, after my wife and her sisters turned my yard into a playground with multiple large pools and large trampolines, and right before this double and my mother show up on my property, an interesting person paid me a visit. A person by the name of Kurt Dunham paid me a visit. He is the child. He was a child neighbor of mine back in the 70s, and he was one of the children that was posing with the county sheriffs in the 70s that was acting as a double. It was the Dunham family that brought their children to the location where the county sheriff officer in the 70s was acting as a double to frame a neighbor. And Kurt Dunham happened to be one of those children. Now, I'm a witness to what they did in 71. I'm already aware they use doubles and photogenic photos, and I'm already aware they help and assist the county sheriff in framing people, and I'm already aware they use their own children in sting ops to frame people, and that they use their own children in conjunction with doubles. Kurt Dunham paid me a visit right after my wife and her sister turned my yard into a playground. From this point forward, I was no longer gung-ho about proving it. And the reason why is because when Kurt Dunham made it known to me he's involved in this, that refreshed a lot of childhood memories that I had from back in the 70s and reminded me that these people not only frame people using doubles and photogenic photos, these people are also poisoners. Because, and the reason I know this is because they targeted, the Dunhams and the county sheriffs targeted me and my side of the family when I was only a child in the 70s. And because I'm a witness. I witnessed the Dunhams and the county sheriff framing a neighbor in 71. In 72, the Dunhams and the county sheriffs were planning stolen property on our property to frame us, and they also set a garage on fire that was behind our house. In 1973, the Dunham family found out that I still remembered what happened in 71. And that's when they began poisoning me, they began poisoning my brother, and they began poisoning my father. So, my father was being gang stalked at the time in the 70s. In 73, he was surrounded by sting operatives at his place of employment. They were deliberately sabotaging his job. The Dunham's family was palling around with my mother, and I was under the belief back then that my mother was involved in these poisonings, and that she was being coached and directed by Kurt Dunham's mother, Darlene Dunham, because Darlene Dunham was palling around with my mother in the 70s when the poisonings began, and they were using different means and methods to poison. They were targeting me and my brother and my father all at the same time. They were poisoning me by a school prescription that the county sheriffs influenced the school to put me on. And this was immediately after the Dunhams found out that I remembered what happened in 71. As soon as I mentioned that, within like a week, I think, it was like a week, I ended up being kicked out of school. No reason given by the school, other than the school just sending me home with a letter to my parents, and letter was telling my parents that making up whatever excuses they were making up. And I wish my parents never divulged with me. I know I was a good kid back then. I never got in any trouble or did anything wrong. But for whatever reason, I was kicked out of school. And shortly after the Dunhams found out that I remembered what happened in 71. And the school was insisting I go on a prescription. And it was some weird sounding, drug prescription name that, nobody really knows what the hell it is, and I didn't know what it was. My parents didn't know what the hell it was, but the school kicked me out of school and told me I can't go back until I go on this prescription. So my mother stupidly put me on that prescription. I didn't find out what it was until I was 18 years old. It was speed. So at the age of 8 years old, when I'm only at the ripe age of 8 years old, the county sheriffs and the Dunham family used their power of influence to put me on speed right after they found out that I still remembered what they did in 71. My father and my brother were also being poisoned at this time. They were being poisoned, meaning whatever they used and whoever did it, they were using actual poison, because my father dropped in 73. He had to go to the hospital. He was poisoned. He told me he was poisoned, but he never elaborated on the details. And the reason why is because he's aware he's a target. He's aware that people in law enforcement that are involved back then, and he feared for my own safety. It was a situation where I'm only 8 years old at the time, and he feared for my safety, and I think he figured the less I know about it, the safer I'll be. And my brother was also being poisoned. So while I'm being drugged with fucking speed, my brother and my father was being poisoned. Now, keep in mind, this was back in the 70s. The county sheriffs and the Dunhams and their civilian operatives weren't really hiding the fact in 73 and 74 and 75 through that time frame that they were gang stalking me and my brother and my father. And I was under the impression back then that Darlene Dunham, Kurt Dunham's mother, was directing and coaching my mother back then to frame us for crimes. My brother was being framed by my very mother. Back then, I was too young to understand what was going on. I was too confused by how on everybody. You have to look at it from an 8-year-old's perspective. From my perspective at the time, I didn't have the wisdom to understand what the hell was going on, and from my perspective, it seemed like everybody was turning on everybody, and I didn't know why. I was aware that poisonings were going on because of the fact that my brother and my father told me they were poisoned. Well, my father told me he was poisoned. My brother also told me he was poisoned, but he didn't refer to it as poison. My brother was only 5 years older than me, so when I was 8, my brother was like 12, 13 years old. And he didn't understand what the fuck was going on either. All he could do was describe the symptoms he was suffering. He didn't know he was poisoned. All he could do was describe what it felt like. And that's what he did. He described to me what it felt like. Now, being 8 years old at the time, I didn't know what it means. I had no idea what it meant, based on the symptoms he was suffering and the symptoms he was describing to me. Because I'm only 8 years old, I didn't realize at the time that he was poisoned. Even though he's describing all the symptoms of being poisoned. But because I'm only 8 years old, I didn't understand, and neither did my brother. He was scared. He didn't know who to turn to. I was scared. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know who my friends were, who my enemies were. My brother didn't know who his friends were or who his enemies were. All we know was shit was going down and bad things were happening, and we were all being ganged up on. And the entire time it seemed like my mother was all grins back then. So, and I never forgot that. I feared my mother because of that. I was afraid that I was going to be... I was under the belief then, at the age of 8 years old, that we're being poisoned. And I knew people in law enforcement were involved because we were being heavily targeted by people in law enforcement. We were being gang stalked any fucking time we left our home. My brother was repeatedly getting battered by people every time he left the home. In 73 and 74, my brother could not leave the home without being gang stalked and followed and terrorized by organized groups of people. They ended up having my brother, the state of Oregon ended up having my brother committed. And that's how they got rid of him. That is how the state got rid of him, and that's how they covered up the poisonings. My father was so badly poisoned, he went to the hospital repeatedly, and the hospital repeatedly covered it up. And he couldn't get help at all. There was nobody he can call for help. And he knew he's a victim of a sting, and he was under the impression that everybody turned on him. So my father withdrew emotionally and disconnected emotionally from all of this at this point. And because all of this was happening, I ended up pretty much doing the same thing. I ended up disconnecting emotionally, and I spent pretty much the remainder of the 70s pretty much stayed in my room. This sting operation of theirs back in the 70s destroyed my family. After they got rid of my brother and they had him committed, and he's only a teenager, for God's sakes. He was only like 12, 13 years old. After they had him committed, and thus they literally got rid of him in this manner. And my father had no say in any of this. My mother was completely on board with everything that seemed to be happening back then. And I was scared. I was genuinely scared. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know who's on my side, who's not on my side. My father was giving me the impression he didn't trust me anymore, and that he didn't trust anybody in the family anymore. And he disconnected himself from me emotionally and just literally wanted nothing to do with me from that point forward. And I didn't know why. I can look back on it now, and I can easily forgive him, because I know he's innocent, for one thing. And for another thing, he had every fucking reason in the fucking universe to not trust anybody at that point. And by the time after this sting operation got rid of my brother, from that point forward, the Dunhams and the county sheriffs and their other civilian sting operatives once again started targeting me. At the age of 9 years old, I was ganged up on by Kurt Dunham and by two other, I would have to describe as much older teenagers that were connected to law enforcement, and they were shooting at me with pellet rifles. And Kurt Dunham was trying to hide the fact that he's not involved in it, but at the same time, he's not really hiding the fact, because the whole time they were doing this shit to me, they weren't shooting him with a pellet rifle. They were shooting me. He was with me, but these two dudes, Kurt Dunham took me to the park in 75, I believe it was. We were hanging out at the park, and somebody shot me with a pellet gun. And we saw these two dudes that were hiding behind these very tall pine trees that are in the parks here in Portland, Oregon. And they were wearing camos. And they were fucking shooting at me. And with pellet rifles. And Kurt Dunham was with me, and he was pretending he was being shot at, but he wasn't. And he was grinning, and I noticed it. He was grinning. I was under the belief at this point that I was being set up. I'm being ganged up on and set up at this point. And he was grinning over all this. And he was trying to encourage me to go after them to beat them up. These two dudes were bigger than me. I'm only like, in 75, I was 10 years old. And I was 9, 10 years old when this happened. It was 74 or 75, I can't remember which. I think it was 74 because I'm under the impression I was 9 at the time, based on my memory of it. This incident occurred right after they got rid of my brother. Right after they literally got rid of my brother. He never got a trial. He never got anything. He was never formally charged with a single fucking crime, but they got rid of him. They ganged up on him, they poisoned him, and they vilified him in the neighborhood, and then they labeled him mentally ill to cover up the fact he was poisoned, and then they just locked him up for the rest of his fucking life without a fucking trial. And from this, immediately after this, next thing I know, I'm with Kurt Dunham at a park, and I'm being shot at by two dudes in camos that are shooting pellet rifles at me. And Kurt Dunham was grinning over it and telling me to go after them and beat them up. Now, and he would keep that in mind, because in 1999, after my wife turned and her sisters were paid by the county sheriff to turn my yard into a playground, Kurt Dunham shows up to pay me a visit. Now, with all that background information that I have on the Dunhams and the county sheriffs, I have way more information now at that point. I'm now aware the Dunhams are involved, and I know damn fucking full well that they're very much connected to the county fucking sheriffs, and that they very much use doubles and they use photogenic photos to frame people, and that they use their own brats in such sting operations to pose with doubles. And I'm fucking aware of the fact that they're poisoners. And they went after everybody in my family in the 70s. Now that I'm aware at this point that the Dunhams are involved, I'm no longer gung-ho about proving it. I'm now no longer thinking in terms of, oh, they're just going to frame me, whatever the fuck. The whole time I've been documenting their fucking communications, I didn't give a shit about court. That was the last fucking thing I gave a rat's ass about. The last thing in the universe I gave a shit about at this point was court. But this is the first time when Kurt Dunham paid me this visit after my wife turned our yard into a playground, I'm now, for the first time, thinking in terms of my family is in danger. I have 3 daughters. My mother is already being targeted by these people, and I have 3 daughters. And now I'm discovering that the very poisoners that destroyed my family when I was a child back in the 70s are involved in this operation in 1999. I'm now under the belief from this point forward, my daughters are in danger from these people. I feared they were going to do the same fucking thing to our daughters that they did to me and my brother back in the fucking 70s. I was no longer gung-ho anymore about proving it. And I already proved it. Like I said, I already know they take their time. They take their time framing. And I was taking my time documenting the process and documenting their communications. Since my wife and her whole side of the family is stupid enough to make it known to me the day this all starts that they're all going to be setting my ass up and that they're all treating it like it's a fucking sport. I'm now aware at this point that the Dunhams are involved. They think I don't know what's going on. They think I completely forgot what happened back in the 70s. And Kurt Dunham made it known to me that he moved into a house a couple blocks away. He said he lives about 3-4 blocks away now from where I live. So essentially, what's going on is county sheriffs recruited my wife and her side of the family into a sting operation to frame me as a pedo. And they do what they always do. They take over the surrounding apartments, surrounding their target with their operatives, and they make arrangements to bring in a double. And when they're going to use a double, that means they need children to pose with the double so that they can frame a person, whoever that their target happens to be, as a pedophile. So this is why they bring in the Dunhams. The Dunhams are already known to do this. They have a history of it. They get paid by the county sheriffs to use their brats in sting operations to pose with doubles. And now that I'm aware the Dunhams are involved, it becomes way more personal, because now it's literally like this is something that the county sheriffs and the Dunhams started back in 71. They targeted me back in 71 when I was only 6 years old, just because I'm a witness to them using a double and photogenic photos to frame somebody, and I'm a witness to them using the Dunham's brats in that operation to pose with that double. So I'm already a witness to this activity of theirs in 71, and I have been targeted by these people ever fucking since. Ever fucking since! Now, throughout the 70s, I was too young to understand what was going on. Nobody was really explaining to me what's going on. When the county sheriffs and the Dunhams and the rest of their civilian buddies and their civilian girlfriends and everything ganged up on me and my family back in the 70s, they literally destroyed the entire family. Nobody in my family anymore trusted anybody. When they took my brother away, I realized at this point that he was poisoned. But I didn't realize it when he was describing the symptoms to me. I was being doped up on speed by the county sheriffs and by the school system at the time. But when all hell broke loose and I ended up losing my brother to this goddamn fucking bullshit operation of theirs in the 70s, I realized then that he was poisoned. I didn't know who did it. I knew there was a lot of people targeting us. I didn't understand the concept of organized crime. I had no real, I had a general understanding of crime, I guess. You know, like murder is wrong. You know, fighting is wrong. You know, destruction of property is wrong. The obvious type of crimes. But I was completely unaware of covert crimes and didn't understand the concept of covert crimes at all. And so it was difficult for me to comprehend the fact that there are organized people in this world that lie for one another, and they gang up on people that they target, and they will literally stage or commit crimes for the purpose of framing the people that they're targeting. I was unaware this even existed in this country. I had no knowledge of sting operations or anything. So it wasn't an easy concept for me to comprehend at such a fragile age and under the circumstances of being targeted the way I was by these people. They were heavily targeting me and my family, and I was just too damn young to understand, you know, that it was a sting op. I didn't know. I had no clue. You know, all the signs of it were all there, but I didn't have the wisdom to comprehend what I'm witnessing. But I have a very good memory and never fucking forgot. So when I got older, of course, I realized when I got older how bad the situation really was and how we were victims of organized people in law enforcement and people that are connected to law enforcement, such as people that are buddies to authorities or people that are relatives to authorities. I'm under the assumption that the Dunhams have relatives in the Multnomah County Sheriffs. That may not be the case. I don't know for certain. They've never revealed. They try to hide their connections with the Multnomah County Sheriffs. They don't want people to know they're connected. They try to hide it. I do know back in the 70s that the Dunhams owned a police scanner, and that back in the 70s they didn't want people to know that. I didn't understand back then why, but they were, you know, they were giving me the impression that they didn't, based on the way they didn't like the fact that I asked them, gee, what, I was invited into their home back in, like, I don't know, 72, 73. I think it was 73, and I think that's when, that's before they found out that I still remembered what happened in 71. I noticed some unusual device that the Dunhams had near their TV. And this was 1973, so it's not a fucking VCR. It's not a goddamn, you know, it's not a cable box or anything like that. I didn't know what it was. It wasn't a stereo either. And I said, what is this? And they said, oh, it's a police scanner. But Kurt Dunham told me what it was, but he was nervous about it. It was like he didn't want me to know. He was he seemed a little upset that I noticed it. And he reluctantly admitted that it was a police scanner. Now, keep in mind, I'm completely oblivious to the fact at that point that they framed that neighbor in 71, even though I witnessed them doing it, because I didn't realize that the county sheriff officer was impersonating somebody that lived at that address where the double was at. So I was unaware at the time that they framed the neighbor. Even though I witnessed them framing the neighbor, I didn't have the wisdom to understand what it was that I witnessed. So I was unaware at that time. So they try to hide and conceal their connections to authorities. And I remember very clearly and distinctly back in 73 that the Dunhams pointed out, mentioned to me that they own a police scanner, but not until after. They didn't admit to that until I noticed the police scanner near their TV and asked them what it was. And I said, they reluctantly told me what it was. They didn't want me to know. They didn't like the fact that I noticed it. And I could tell in by their mannerisms and their wordings and the way they were wording things that they weren't very happy that I noticed it. So I know they're connected to law enforcement, even though the Dunham family, their immediate family, are not in law enforcement. So in 1999, when after my wife and her family were paid by the county sheriff to turn my yard into a playground, the Dunhams paid me a visit, and that was like that completely changed my perception of what I need to do in this situation, because it ceased being at this point it ceased being an issue of I need to prove they're framing me in self-defense. I'm no longer thinking in those terms anymore. I'm now thinking in terms of, oh my God, what the hell can I do to save my family from this? That's what I was thinking at that point. I realized that at this point, it's way bigger than what I initially believed this conspiracy of theirs to be, and that there was way too many people involved, and I already knew that the Dunhams used their brats to pose with doubles back in the 70s. I already knew this then. So when Kurt Dunham paid me this visit in 1999, his visit occurred right after I discovered the county sheriffs were taking over the surrounding apartments in order to frame me as a pedo, and that they're funding my wife and her sisters to turn my yard into a playground in preparation for a double's arrival. Now, I'm completely aware of the fact that I'm being framed. I'm already completely, fully aware I'm being framed. The whole time I made the decision I was going to hang in there to prove it. And I was really gung-ho about hanging in there to prove it up until that point. And it's at this point when I remember all the shit that they did to me and my brother and my father back in the 70s, and how they systematically destroyed our entire family, and how they began poisoning right after they found out that I remember what happened in 71. That's when the poisonings began, and I was under the impression that they had my mother involved in it back in the 70s, and that I was under the belief that the county sheriffs and the Dunham family was coaching and directing my mother back in the 70s as to how to poison my father, and they poisoned my brother. And they were keeping me doped up on speed at the damn time, so that, to discredit me as a witness, and to make it more difficult for me to understand what's going on. Not to mention the cause brain damage, because they didn't put me on that prescription until after I pointed out the fact that I remembered what happened in 71. That's when I was kicked out of school, right after that, and told I can't go back unless I go on a prescription. And the prescription was speed. So they were trying to cause brain damage on an 8-year-old. So that should be enough for you to know that the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunhams not only frame innocent grown adults as pedophiles, but they will also poison children in order to cover their own fucking asses. it ceased, literally, from that point forward, for me anyway, it ceased being an issue of, I got to prove they're framing me in self-defense, because at some point they're bringing in a double, they're going to be framing me, so I'm going to be charged with something. I already know this. So in self-defense, in a gung-ho, cavalier, disgusted manner, angry and disgusted manner, I just decided I'm going to hang in there to prove it, and was gung-ho about proving it until it got to that point. That's when it ceased being an issue of proving it in self-defense, because when it got to that point, I realized even if I prove it, which I did, and I was just continuing to prove it by documenting their communications and securing evidence of it, even though I'm proving it, there is nobody that I can call that's going to care. In other words, there are so many people in law enforcement that were involved in this that they would rather just murder me off than to arrest several sting operatives that are framing me using doubles. They'd rather just murder me off. I mean, it got to a point when I realized that there is no way to get help. There's too many people. They have the blessings of local authorities to do this shit to people. And there's too many people that joined into it